Oh man, it's been over 50 years since the fraudulent faux peace, mostly pro-Marxist flower power generation cleaned the Woodstock mud off their beads and smocks. But their fake, media-propagated claims of loving peace, even as they pushed for bigger collectivist government power over our neighbors, have continued, with the agenda becoming so broad and so intense that now one of their elder priestesses, Jane Fonda, gets national airtime to claim the doubly dumb theory that so-called climate change is a result of racism. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. You know, looking back at the not-so-stellar behavior of actress Jane Fonda since she became one of the most prominent radicals of the Sixties Generation, many Americans can see in her fiery, misguided displays the same falsehoods, ignorance, and philosophical venom that have poisoned much of the leftist mass media and Western mass public education system for decades. And while Hanoi Jane once apologized to Megyn Kelly for sitting on an anti-aircraft gun used by the Viet Cong to shoot down U.S. flyers, calling it, quote, the one thing that happened in her days as perhaps not an anti-war activist, but as a promoter of the Viet Cong. And by the way, notice her use of the passive voice in that statement, the one thing that happened, as if it was something that happened to her rather than her own action. Well, she hasn't fully addressed all her other errors in judgment and in promoting misleading pro-collectivist nostrums for decades. So it's no wonder that while pushing her latest film, she would combine two ill-informed fantasies that currently are part of the cultural Marxist magic act. Appearing on the intellectual redoubt of the Kelly Clarkson Show, the two-time Academy Award winner once more revealed why little statuettes don't help educate about climate, the propagandists pushing it, or about race, freedom, living standards, or upward mobility. Courtney O'Brien reports for Fox News, quote, Clarkson asked Fonda how she branched out to other areas of activism, to which the actress suggested it wasn't much of a stretch.
You can take anything, sexism, racism, misogyny, homophobia, whatever, the war, and if you really get into it and study it and learn about it and the history of it and everything's connected. There'd be no climate crisis if it wasn't for racism.
Which first assumes a so-called climate crisis. And of course, that is not the case. Fonda might have been spending too much time reading scripts, but even as her pop media friends kept pushing the apocalyptic climate change fantasy at elitist gatherings that exposed their own hypocrisy, and even as worldwide government climate-focused directives brought hardship and harmed people's lives and businesses, the planet was in another multi-year stretch of zero warming. She evidently missed all that, but she can find the report about the nearly 8-year-long period and the link to the satellite temperature data supporting it at What's Up With That. And she can read the excellent piece written by Lord Christopher Monckton that describes it. But evidently, Jane favors fear-mongering over facts. Perhaps charitably minded observers might grant her a few passes here and there, since she embodies the puerile, emotion-based leftist public face of the caring generation.
Where would they put the poison and the pollution? They're not going to put it in Bel Air. They've got to find some place where poor people or indigenous people or people of color are living. Put it there. They can't fight back. And that's why a big part of the climate movement now has to do with climate justice.
And perhaps generally she draws attention to something approximating a good point. As I've discussed with economics students, since the disposal of trash is handled through collectivism, not through markets, respect for private property, and the importance of responsibility and liability that only the market can provide, people don't actually have to deal with the real expenses of their own trash and how it's eliminated. In most of the Western world, trash is handled by government. The very thing Jane Fonda has consistently applauded and promoted for constant growth. Under the government paradigm, nobody can attach a price to his pollution, and the government won't consider liability when it comes to disposal and dumping. In real market actions, however, where private property and liability are considerations, private companies work to conserve, not waste their investments. They have to be considerate of other people's property, and they find ways to maximize use of their resources, to husband them. As a result, forests owned by private paper and lumber companies, well, they're not clear-cut because their owners have an incentive to keep it going. They don't want to invite soil erosion. If Ms. Fonda is so concerned about so-called climate justice, as she and many of her climate propagandists oft proclaim, if the climate problem she describes is directly tied to racism and exploitation of the poor, then why didn't she speak up when Barack Obama told people in Africa that not everyone can better his or her life to a point where he or she can get air conditioning or a decent home? Why didn't Jane Fonda protest Obama's claim that some people, evidently poor Africans, must be segregated and closed off from better living standards through the use of cheap, storable, efficient petrochemical fuels? Is it her contention that justice is achieved by politicians attacking the internal combustion engine, one of the greatest breakthroughs for life improvement in the history of mankind? Why not allow those people whom she seems to think need her elitist help? Why not let them decide for themselves rather than push onto them things like electric cars and inefficient, environmentally hazardous, unreliable wind farms? Better yet, why doesn't Jane Fonda explain to Kelly how she justifies selling her expensive New Mexico ranch via a company that specializes in selling ranches, often used to raise cattle, which, according to many of her climate cult compadres, are major culprits in the use and emission of nitrogen and methane, both of which her cult colleagues erroneously tell us are so-called warming gases. Perhaps Jane Fonda has had good intentions all along as she has strolled down the elitist collectivist path. Perhaps she truly wants to help people whom, from her lofty celebrity position, she sees as needing her help via, of course, the force of government. But the recipe she has served never has helped the people for whom she supposedly cares. Instead, that recipe has been one of warmed-over Marxism, which is one of the worst ideologies in the history of the world. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Sorry, Ms. Fonda, if you're upset by this. Hope you watch, check out some of the information, and I hope you, the rest of you, will share this information with your friends. Please visit us at Rumble, which is really making great strides. They improved the site recently, and it's really rolling well. You can watch us there without censorship. Please hit the thumbs up, and please share these videos with your friends. You can still watch us on YouTube, of course. We'll see you in the comments section. Visit us at MRCTV.org. That's MRCTV.org. And please consider donating to the Media Research Center. We'll also see you on Facebook, on Twitter, on Parler, on TikTok, on Instagram. And if you want to find me on Gab, I'm at Gardner Goldsmith. And on Twitter, I'm at Gard Goldsmith. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.